The laughter hit her before the door even closed behind her. It wasn't loud. That was the thing nobody tells you about that kind of laughter. It doesn't need to be. It travels across a boardroom the way cold does, quiet and absolute, and by the time it reaches you, it's already inside your coat. Dr. Yvonne Beauchamp-Osei stood at the threshold of the 42nd floor conference room of Hartwell Medical Centre and felt every pair of eyes in the room find her at once. 12 people. 12 chairs. One empty seat at the far end of the table that nobody had thought to point her toward. "Can I help you?" The voice came from the man standing nearest the window. Silver-haired, broad-shouldered, the kind of man who had learned early in life that a well-cut suit could do half the work of an argument. His name was Dr. Franklin Aldridge, chief of surgery, 26 years at Hartwell, and he was looking at Yvonne the way people look at a door that has opened into the wrong room. She said, "I'm Dr. Beauchamp-Osei. I was invited." He didn't raise his voice. He lowered it, which was worse. "By whom?" The woman to his left. Dr. Patricius, something Yvonne hadn't caught the last name, pressed 2 fingers over her mouth. It wasn't quite a smile, it was the polite container for one. "By the board," Yvonne said. Franklin Aldridge looked at her for a long moment. Then he looked at the room. The room looked back, and somewhere in that silent exchange, a decision was made that Yvonne was not part of. "The board," he repeated, and this time he did smile, and it was the kind of smile that belongs to a man who has sat at the top of a hierarchy long enough to forget that hierarchies are built, not born. "You're what, 28, 29, 31, right?" He pulled out his chair and sat down. "Why don't you wait outside, and someone will come explain how the scheduling system works." She didn't move. The room noticed. 3 weeks earlier, Yvonne had been standing in a different room, smaller, warmer, on the 9th floor of a building 3 blocks east when she got the call. She was reviewing post-op notes. Still in her scrubs, at 7 in the evening, the kind of tired that lives behind the eyes and doesn't go away with sleep. She almost let it go to voicemail. The number was a Toronto area code she didn't recognize. She answered. The voice on the other end was calm and unhurried in the way that very few people over 60 learn to be. He introduced himself as Dr. Cornelius Hartwell. Not the hospital's founder, that Hartwell had been dead for 40 years, but his grandson and the current chairman of the Hartwell Foundation Board. He said he'd been following her work. He said that was an understatement. He asked if she had 20 minutes. She sat down on the edge of a supply cart and said yes. He told her about a position. New. Specifically created. Head of Surgical Innovation, a role that would sit above the departmental structure, reporting directly to the board. It came with a mandate. Modernize the hospital's approach to minimally invasive procedure, rebuild the research pipeline, and fix what he called, carefully, precisely, a culture problem we have been too polite to name. He did not tell her who else was being considered. He didn't need to. The way he spoke about her work, her specific work, her published papers, her outcomes data from her time in Edmonton, told her that this conversation was not a preliminary screening. It was a formality of a different kind. She said she needed to think about it. He said of course. He also said that her mentor, Dr. Grace Annan Boateng, sent her regards. Yvonne held the phone for a long time after the call ended. Grace Annan Boateng had been the person who taught Yvonne that brilliance without patience is just nuts. They had met during Yvonne's residency at Sunnybrook, when Grace was already a decade into a career that had quietly reshaped how thoracic surgery was taught in this country. She was not famous in the way that got your face on the side of a hospital building. She was famous in the way that mattered more. Surgeons in 3 provinces had trained under her, and they remembered every word. She had also, as Yvonne would later learn, spent the last 2 years consulting for the Hartwell Foundation Board on exactly the kind of structural overhaul that nobody at Hartwell Medical Centre knew was coming. That was Grace. She built things in the background, quietly, and then she stepped aside and let the thing she built walk through the door on its own. Yvonne had not known she was being built. She had thought she was just doing her job. The morning of the board meeting, she wore the charcoal blazer. Not because it was her nicest, it wasn't, but because it had the right weight to it. The kind of fabric that doesn't apologize for taking up space. She arrived 12 minutes early. The receptionist on 42 looked up, took in the blazer, the ID badge, folder under her arm, and said, pleasantly, "Can I help you find something?" Yvonne gave her name and the meeting reference number. The receptionist checked her screen twice. Then she smiled the smile of someone recalibrating. "Of course, Dr. Beauchamp-Osei. I'll let them know you're here." She was shown to a waiting area. She sat. She did not check her phone. She looked out the window at the lake, which was the color of pewter that morning. Flat and enormous, the kind of view that reminds you that whatever is happening inside the building is very small by comparison. When someone finally came to collect her, it was not the receptionist. It was a junior administrator who walked quickly and did not make eye contact, which told her that something had been said in the room before she arrived. She had learned to read buildings. 12 years in medicine teaches you that the hallway outside a room tells you more than the room itself. She walked in. And then came the laughter. She did not wait outside. She walked to the empty chair at the far end of the table and she sat down. She set her folder on the table in front of her. She folded her hands. Franklin Aldridge watched her do this with an expression that moved through several stages: surprise, irritation, and finally a kind of cold recalibration that Yvonne recognized as the face of a man deciding how much force to use. "I don't think you understand how this meeting works," he said. "I think I do," Yvonne said. "The agenda was emailed to me on Thursday. Item 3 is my appointment." Silence. Not the comfortable kind. The woman across from Yvonne, Dr. Renata Sokolowski, chief of internal medicine, whose name Yvonne had seen on 3 papers she'd read in residency, set down her pen. Her expression was harder to read, cautious maybe, or the beginning of something else. "Your appointment," Aldridge repeated. "Head of Surgical Innovation." Yvonne opened her folder, not because she needed to, but because there is a particular kind of confidence in not needing to rush. She slid a single page across the table. "Effective the 1st of next month." Aldridge did not look at the page. He looked at her. "I've been at this hospital for 26 years, he said slowly, as if the number itself was an argument. "I've seen 30 people walk through that door thinking a piece of paper made them something. It doesn't work that way." "How does it work?" He smiled. "You earn it. You show up. You learn who's who. You don't walk into a room full of people who've been here longer than you've been a doctor and act like the table already belongs to you." Yvonne let the silence sit for exactly 3 seconds. She had learned that trick from Grace, who had learned it from somewhere older. "The table belongs to the hospital," she said, "and I'm here to help it work better." Someone at the far left of the table made a sound that was not quite a cough. Aldridge's jaw tightened. "You're a child," he said, and this time he didn't bother to frame it as anything else. That was the moment the door opened. Dr. Cornelius Hartwell did not look like a man who owned anything. That was the first thing people said about him. Always, and it was the most accurate thing. He was tall and slightly stooped, with the unhurried walk of someone whose calendar had been cleared for this specific hour. He wore a gray suit that had been expensive 20 years ago and had aged into something better than expensive. He was not alone. Behind him were 2 members of the foundation board, a woman Yvonne knew from the email chain and a man she didn't, and behind them, in a cardigan and reading glasses pushed up on her head, was Dr. Grace Annan Boateng. The room went very still. Aldridge turned, and in turning, something shifted in his face. Not guilt, not yet, but the first awareness of the geography of the room, which had just changed entirely. "Franklin," Cornelius said, not unfriendly, not warm either, the voice of a man who had spent 40 years in boardrooms, and had learned that tone is the most efficient currency. "Cornelius." Aldridge straightened. I heard." Cornelius walked to the table and pulled out the chair beside Yvonne. He sat. He looked around the room, taking his time the way a man does when he wants everyone to understand that he has all of it. I heard from outside the door. Remarkable acoustics in this hallway. Nobody laughed. I should introduce everyone properly. He turned to Yvonne with the simplest possible expression. Courteous, unhurried. Though I believe Dr. Beauchamp-Osei and I have already spoken. We have, Yvonne said. Good. He folded his hands on the table. Then let me introduce her to the rest of you. This is Dr. Yvonne Beauchamp-Osei. She completed her surgical residency at Sunnybrook, her fellowship in minimally invasive technique at the University of Alberta, and she has published 17 peer-reviewed papers in the last 6 years, 2 of which are currently being used as teaching materials at McGill and U of T. He paused. She is also the reason our outcomes data in laparoscopic procedure is about to look very different from what it looked like last quarter. He said it simply, without drama, the way facts sound when they don't need decoration. Then he looked at Aldridge. I believe, Cornelius said, that you were in the middle of something when we came in. Aldridge said nothing. Grace caught Yvonne in the hallway afterward, while the room was still emptying out. She was carrying her reading glasses in one hand and a paper cup of tea in the other, and she looked exactly as she always looked. Like a woman had somewhere else to be but had decided for the moment to be here instead. You sat down, Grace said. I sat down, Yvonne confirmed. Grace looked at her for a moment. Then she nodded, once, the way she nodded when a resident had done something correctly. Not praise exactly, but recognition. The acknowledgement that something had been done as it should be done. He's going to make it difficult, Grace said. Not a warning, a statement of weather. I know. He has allies in the department. He's been there long enough to build a culture that looks like tradition, but functions like a wall. I know that too. Grace sipped her tea. What are you going to do about it? Yvonne thought about the folder in her bag. The 6 months of data she had pulled together before this morning. The proposals, the restructured residency schedule, the 3 pilot programs, all of it quiet, all of it ready. The same thing you always told me to do, she said. Grace raised her eyebrows. Work. The months that followed were not easy. Nobody who tells you this kind of story tells you that part honestly enough. They give you the beginning, the insult, the moment of humiliation, and they give you the ending, the vindication, the room that goes quiet in a different way. What they skip is the middle, and the middle is where the real thing happens. The middle looked like this. Arriving before anyone else. Leaving after everyone had gone. Learning the hospital's research infrastructure the way you learn a language you were not born into. By immersion, by error, by the slow accumulation of what works. The surgical residents were wary of her at first. She was new, she was young, she was from outside the culture, and Franklin Aldridge was still in the building, still a chief of department, still the man who had been there longest. His opinion carried weight, even unspoken. She did not try to win them over, she taught them. There is a difference. Winning people over is about charm. Teaching them is about showing up on a Tuesday morning and walking through a technique they have been doing incorrectly for 3 years, without judgment, without drama, and making it make sense. After 2 months of this, a third-year resident named Marcus. No, not Marcus. The list had a Marcus. She had been careful. A resident named Tobias started staying late after her sessions. Then another. Then 4. She ran into Renata Sokolowski in the elevator one morning in November. They had exchanged emails but not much else. Your retention numbers, Renata said, without preamble. Yes, they're the best we've had in 8 years. Yvonne said, thank you. I'm not complimenting you, Renata said, and there was the faintest edge of something in her voice. Not hostility, more like a woman deciding whether to trust a thing that seems too straightforward. I'm telling you because Aldridge is going to use them against you. Yvonne turned to look at her. How? He'll say the residents are soft. That good retention means you're not pushing them hard enough. Renata looked at the floor numbers ticking upward. It's not logical. But he'll say it, and half the department will nod. Because they've been nodding at him for 20 years and it's a hard habit to break. What would you do? The elevator reached Renata's floor. She stepped out, then turned back. I'd get the board data before he does, she said. I'd make sure Cornelius Hartwell sees it first. The doors closed. She got the board data. She also got something else. Something she hadn't anticipated, which was a conversation with one of the younger attendings, a man named Dr. Kwame Sante, who stopped her in the corridor one afternoon and said, quietly, that he had been trying to get the same residency reforms approved for 3 years, that Aldridge had blocked every proposal. He didn't read them, Kwame said. He just blocked them. Why are you telling me this? Kwame looked at her steadily. He was soft-spoken, careful, the kind of person who chose words the way other people chose tools, for precision, not volume. Because, he said, you're going to win this, and I want to be on the right side of it before you do. It was the most honest thing anyone had said to her since she'd arrived. She asked him to send her the 3 years of proposals. He sent them that evening. She stayed up until 2 in the morning reading them, and what she found was not just good work. It was excellent work, meticulous and patient, the kind of thinking that had been done by someone who cared deeply and had been ignored deeply in equal measure. She thought about what 3 years of that felt like. She thought about Grace, and about the quiet way Grace had once told her that the most insidious kind of obstruction is the kind that doesn't announce itself. She rebuilt the proposals, kept Kwame's thinking intact, expanded it, added the 6 months of data she'd gathered, and reframed the whole package for the board presentation, scheduled for the following week. She put Kwame's name first on the document. He found out the night before the presentation. He knocked on her office door at 8:30 in the evening, and when she looked up from her screen, he was standing in the doorway, holding the printed document, and he didn't say anything for a moment. You didn't have to do that, he finally said. I know, she said. The board presentation was in April, spring in Toronto, which means the lake was doing something bright and cold outside the 42nd floor windows, and the room was the same room she had first walked into. 11 months earlier. The chairs were the same. The carpet was the same. The table was the same. Franklin Aldridge was sitting 3 seats down from her. She had learned over the months to read him differently. He was not a stupid man. That was what people got wrong when they reduced him to his worst behavior. He was a man who had built a self-concept around being the authority in the room, and authority, when it goes unchallenged long enough, stops being a thing you have and becomes a thing you are. When that happens, any challenge to your authority and starts feeling like a disagreement and starts feeling like an attack on your existence. He wasn't fighting her because she was wrong. He was fighting her because she was there. She knew this didn't make what he'd done acceptable. She had held that clearly, carefully, through every month of it. But understanding someone's architecture was different from excusing it. It was useful information, and she was a surgeon. She had been trained to use the information she had. She presented for 38 minutes. She presented the outcomes data, the retention figures, the pilot program results, one of which had already been cited in a provincial health report that had landed on 3 desks in Queen's Park. She presented Kwame's 3 years of work, properly attributed, and she let the work speak at its own volume, which was considerable. When she finished, Cornelius Hartwell asked 2 questions. Both were about scalability. Then, the board voted. The full reform package passed 9-1. The abstention was not Aldridge. Afterward, in the hallway, Aldridge found her. She had been expecting this. She had been expecting it the way you expect weather, not hoping for it, not dreading it, just aware that it was coming. He looked older than he had in October, or maybe she was just seeing him more clearly. You're going to have to work with these people for a long time, he said. I plan to, she said. You want to vote. He said it the way people say things. They're trying to believe. That's not the same as winning. She looked at him, and she thought about everything she could say in that moment. The smart things, the devastating things. The things that would feel satisfying for exactly as long as it took to say them. She said, "I know. That's why I'm still here." She walked back toward the elevator. The same elevator. The same lobby below, where, 11 months ago, she had arrived with a folder and a charcoal blazer, and walked into a room full of people who had already decided what she was. A week later, the hospital announced the restructuring publicly. Kwame was named co-lead of the new research program. Aldridge filed a formal objection to the board, which the board received, reviewed, and set aside. He announced his early retirement 2 months later. The result, his statement said, of wanting to spend more time with his family. The statement did not mention the independent review the board had quietly commissioned into his department's previous 8 years. That review was still ongoing. It would take another 6 months to complete, and when it was complete, the numbers would not be kind to him. Yvonne did not feel triumphant about that. She felt something more complicated and less convenient. A kind of tired satisfaction that is not the same as happiness, but is more durable. The satisfaction of a thing done correctly, which is different from easily. On her last day before the official transition, she rode the elevator down from 42 to ground level and walked out through the main lobby. The receptionist at the front desk, a different one from last October, looked up and smiled. Yvonne smiled back. She walked out into the April afternoon, where Toronto was doing its complicated best with the season, warm in the sun and cold in the shadow, the lake glittering 3 blocks east. She stood on the sidewalk for a moment with no folder under her arm, and no particular destination, just the afternoon and the city, and the quiet understanding that the hardest part was not behind her. It was what came next. And she realized looking forward to it.